Enright just joined.
Go ahead, Gene.
Enright.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. My name is Eugene Rule, and I will be your host and moderator for today's program, which is Odyssey of the Veterans for Peace Anti-Nuclear Sailboat, the Golden Rule, around the U.S. and to Cuba. And I'm also a lifetime member of Veterans for Peace. The Golden Rule Sailboat is a project of Veterans for Peace to publicize in a very dramatic fashion our opposition to nuclear weapons and war. They have recovered and restored the original peace sailboat, the Golden Rule, which set sail in 1958 to stop nuclear weapon tests at the Marshall Islands. And these inspired many peacemakers and peace ships that followed. Our speakers today are Helen Jaccard and Gerry Condon. Helen is a project manager for the voyage of the Golden Rule, and her partner, Gerry Condon, is a former president of Veterans for Peace and a current board member. They will report on their just completed 15-month Odyssey with the anti-nuclear sailboat, meeting people along the length of the Mississippi, across the Gulf Coast, and onto Cuba, and then up the East Coast and back to the Midwest via inland waterways. They will also discuss organizing a peace movement and the Peace in Ukraine coalition. But let me pause here and give you some background of our library and our institute. We're all in cyberspace right now in various places across the nation and around the world. But our physical and spiritual home is the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, located at 6501 Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, about a mile south of the University of California campus in Berkeley. Sunday morning at the Marxist Library is a project of the Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, or ICSS Marx. Our website is icssmarx.org, as you probably know. ICSS was formed in 2004 as the research and educational arm of the library to further its goals of preserving the written heritage of Karl Marx and supporting struggles for racial and gender equality and for some socialism. Some of us are members of specific parties and tendencies, others are not. Our workshops, forums, and publications, therefore, do not follow any party line, nor do they represent any kind of group consensus on the issues involved. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And as a group, we continue to draw inspiration from Karl Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And our speakers today exemplify this Marxist principle. And before I turn the floor over, I will remind you to hold your questions and comments to the end and to show respect for our speakers and other participants. Racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic language is not tolerated at our forums. Helen and Gerry have a slideshow which will last for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we will turn to questions and answers. And we ask folks to hold these to about 2 minutes and to focus on a single topic. So I will end my remarks and turn it over to our speakers, Helen and Gerry.
Hi, and welcome to all of you. I see so many familiar faces. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you, Roger and Jean and the Marxist Library for hosting us today. This is a wonderful opportunity to see you all. I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation about the Golden Rule Project and our recent adventures, our plan for the future, and our educational program. So I'm going to share my screen here.
We can see it.
Okay. All right, so this is a nice picture of the Golden Rule sailboat itself as it exists today, or as it was a couple of years ago. We are a project of Veterans for Peace, which has over 100 US chapters, 10 international chapters, and 3,000 members. The Golden Rule Project implements part of the Veterans for Peace statement of purpose. The first anti-interventionist one, restrain our governments from interfering overtly and covertly in the international affairs of other nations. And we learn a lot about that as we travel. And to end the arms race and reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons, that is our primary focus. Back in 1958, not only had the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they had also used 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The biggest one being in Bikini Atoll, March 1st, 1954, the Castle Bravo test, which should not have even been done that day. And it was equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima blasts. What was happening at the time was that people were getting upset about the strontium-90 that these blasts were producing that acts like calcium in our bodies and getting into babies' teeth and bones and mother's milk and cow's milk. And women were testing their milk for radiation before they would give it to their babies. People tried everything they could to stop the nuclear weapons tests. Eventually, the good group of Quakers decided to sail right into the nuclear testing zone in the Marshall Islands. So they bought a small boat, the Golden Rule, and sailed it out into the Pacific, stopped to refuel and resupply in Honolulu, and headed back out. Sorry. No. Sorry, I've got a technical problem here. Just a minute.
Then go back up here.
Okay. All right. Okay. They headed back out towards the Marshall Islands, and a Coast Guard cutter caught up with them and brought them back. What happened next was the crew was put in jail, and that sparked big anti-nuclear protests, not only in the United States, but all over the world, to get this testing stopped and to free the crew of the Golden Rule. While the crew was in jail, another boat came along, the Phoenix of Hiroshima, captained by Dr. Earl Reynolds, who was a researcher on the effects of radiation on children in Hiroshima. And this boat took the baton from the Golden Rule, and they sailed into the Marshall Islands nuclear testing zone. Dr. Reynolds was arrested and spent 2 years undergoing trials in Honolulu. In 2010, the Golden Rule sank in a gale in far northern California, Humboldt Bay. Also that year, the Phoenix sank in the Sacramento River Delta. Separate incidents. The Phoenix is still underwater, and the Golden Rule has been restored. It took 5 years to put her back together again. We relaunched in June of 2015. There's the brand new boat. And our first voyage was down to San Diego for the Veterans for Peace National Convention. And then we sailed back up to Humboldt Bay. Our second voyage, 2016, we went all over the Pacific Northwest. And then we've gone down to Southern California several times. When President Trump and Kim were threatening each other with nuclear war, we decided that we needed to take the Golden Rule into the Pacific, and we went to the Hawaiian Islands, all around the Hawaiian Islands. We were headed towards Japan, and unfortunately, after we spent that time all over the Hawaiian Islands, COVID happened and prevented us from going further. This is just a picture of the Golden Rule in Honolulu, both 1958 and 2020. The picture on the right-hand side, we are protesting against the biggest the biggest naval exercise that the United States conducts. It's called RIMPAC. I'm sorry?
Original story of the group.
I did. Okay, so when we were in Hawaii, one of the things we did was to learn about all of the nuclear madness and the impacts of nuclear madness and militarism in Hawaii. So Hawaii is a target, easy target for North Korea, China, Russia, and they have live fire training ranges. They invade the beaches of Hawaii. There's depleted uranium contamination in 2 sites, at least in Hawaii. There's a big fuel storage tank system in Hawaii that has been, they're decontaminating it now. They've defueled those storage tanks. There's a big missile defense system possibly going to be built, and 20 to 25% of the land in Hawaii is occupied by the U.S. military. So we learn a lot wherever we go, but this was particularly shocking. When we got back to the U.S. after our Hawaii visit, we decided to implement the dream of people who had rebuilt the boat in Humboldt Bay, and they thought that they wanted this boat to go through all of the navigable waters of the United States. So we trucked the Golden Rule to Minneapolis, and you can see on the left is our plan, and on the right is what we actually did from the tracking map that we have. We visited over 102 cities and towns to talk about nuclear abolition. Went 10,300 miles. Along our way, 22 chapters donated to us and 36 chapters hosted us so that we could do presentations in their towns. So that's a lot of exposure given, and a lot of distance that we traveled. Going down the Mississippi River, one of the most important things we did along this voyage was to interact with a group of 800 to 1,000 Marshallese people in Dubuque, Iowa. And this was headed up by Art Roach, who's a Veterans for Peace member there. And when we got there, what we found out was that the Marshallese people there had never heard of the Golden Rule. But when they found out about it and the fact that it was coming, they organized big time. And there were hundreds of people on site when the Golden Rule first arrived at this picture. And there were these wonderful women singing beautiful harmonies to welcome the boat into the dock. We had singing and dancing and boat tours and good discussions all weekend long there in Dubuque, Iowa. Our next particularly significant stop was in Cuba. We were headed around the Florida Keys, and Gerry suggested that maybe we might want to go to Cuba. So we arranged for a arts and culture visit that was already planned and just joined them by bringing 6 people along by boat and another 5 or 6 people by air. And they had a big cultural exchange and, of course, talked a lot about the blockade. Veterans for Peace board member Anya Anderson was with us, and he was at the helm as we approached Hemingway Marina near Havana. So this is the Cuba delegation. We made special t-shirts for the crew. I see one of not only is Gerry here, but also I think Zoe Bird is here on this call today. So
Anthony.
And Anthony Donovan. So a couple of the people that went to Cuba with us are on the call today. It's nice to see you both. As we headed up the coast of Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas, we sang with the Raging Grannies, or well, I did. We met with a lot of people, Quakers and Buddhists. It was a wonderful experience meeting so many people, and of course, Catholic worker folks. Coming back from Cuba, this is a banner that we held out to end the blockade of Cuba. Gerry will be talking a bit about the Cuba trip when he has his turn. We like to do water-based protests. So before we headed into the Kings Bay nuclear-armed Trident submarine base, we held up some banners and talked a lot about what they're doing there and the danger of the Trident submarines that are hosted there in Kings Bay, Georgia. Another thing we do is invite people to visit the boat. This was a particularly good visit because it's a mostly Black high school. Another thing we like to do with our events is peace picnics in the park. And usually there's music and sometimes dancing. It's a great way to bring the community together. And on March 1st every year, we commemorate the Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, the day that Castle Bravo was detonated in the Marshall Islands, that contaminated so many people and the land, and the Japanese fishing boat, the Lucky Dragon 5. We've held concerts. This was a really nice one. And fly the sails even at the dock whenever we can. Wherever we go, we try to see if the mayors and city councils, maybe county, maybe state legislators will give us a proclamation of welcome. These proclamations are an educational tool. They educate the politicians, but they also educate the public, and the press will often cover this, where they're declaring their opposition to nuclear weapons and their support for the Golden Rule's mission. We also inspire artists. So these are a couple of examples of the beautiful flyers that people made up, that we reuse these designs again and again because we think that they're a fantastic way to engage people in a way other than the brain. You want to engage people through the heart as well and get people excited about the project and nuclear disarmament, which is a very serious and dry topic unless you add some kind of color to it. Here are some of the protest things that we did along the Great Loop. This was the Fleet Week Parade of Warships in New York City on the Hudson River. Was our 6th Fleet Week protest. This is where the Navy brings their ships into the local ports, into our cities. That means they're desensitizing us to war and militarism and making it seem like a normal thing. So we always protest against that whenever we can. In New Haven, Connecticut, Groton Electric Boat makes and hosts nuclear-armed submarines. So we protested right there in front, right across the river from their manufacturing facility. And then we were in Norfolk, Connecticut, where there's a huge naval shipyard there. We just put up our sails oftentimes. It's enough to get the message across. And our most northern stop of our trip was Groton, Connecticut, where Bath Iron Works. I'm sorry. not Groton, Connecticut. We're in Bath, Maine, I'm sorry. Where Bath Iron Works makes nuclear capable warships. So that's what we were doing there, just sailing up and down around their manufacturing facility. Obviously, we have a very busy schedule, as is illustrated by this flyer on the right. When we were in Washington, D.C., we did something I've never done before. We walked the halls of Congress. Veterans for Peace has a nuclear abolition working group, and we've been very active with guest speakers, and we wrote a nuclear posture review. Now, the presidential nuclear posture review normally says we will use nuclear weapons first, and we will use them in response to chemical and biological weapons, cyber attacks. We'll use them in space. We will use them against, anybody that we feel like. It's very, very aggressive. Well, the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review, in creating it, we analyzed the relationship between the United States and all of the nuclear armed countries and Iran, and figured out where we could use diplomacy for nuclear disarmament. It's a very powerful document, and Gerry will be talking much more about that later. But we gave a copy of this document to every member of the Senate and House. Now, just like in Hawaii, we learned a lot about what's going on locally. When we were going up the Potomac River towards Washington, D.C., we discovered that there's a lot of military poisons there. There's PFAS there, and they use the Potomac River for a firing range, So there's explosive weapons, chemicals, and metals going into the Potomac River. And so we talked a lot about that, and we also sailed past nuclear power plants, including one that's only 3 miles from a liquid natural gas export facility, meaning that if there was a problem with the power plant or the natural gas plant, it could cause a problem for the other one. We were well covered in the media. It was amazing. Every single town we went to, except maybe Washington, D.C., covered us in some form or another, and usually with a nice picture of the boat and a very nice write-up. A total of 97 when you combine TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, 97 pieces of coverage along our route. When we were in New York City, Anthony Donovan, who's on the call, helped us to arrange for a meeting with 12 United Nations missions. And maybe it was 13. We met in the office of the Mexico UN mission, and they just hosted the second meeting of states parties of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. What you see us holding there is flags from, at the time, the 66 countries that have ratified the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And we had a great discussion. The people that attended said that they normally only get to talk to the State Department, and it was a very nice treat for them to be able to talk to citizen activists from the United States. I'm sorry about this next picture, but we had a chance to meet with the UN mission from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And she gave us 2 hours of her time. We talked a lot about what's going on now with respect to radiation, climate change, and the agreements between the United States and the Marshall Islands, including that there are a lot of U.S. military veterans from the Marshall Islands, and they don't have a VA facility. Also, because of the U.S. nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, it was shocking to learn that they don't have cancer care there. So they are stuck with trying to find the airfare and the means to get cancer treatments in the United States when they're affected by what it is that we've done to them. This stop we made in Rhode Island was particularly significant to me because it included a lot of the components that we saw along the way that were very inspirational to us as project team and crew. We received a nice mayoral welcome from the Bristol Town Councilman, and we had another wonderful welcome, which we did in many places, by the indigenous tribe that lives there. And then we had the extraordinary rendition band was just a hoot. They played a lot of great music and had us up dancing and marching all around the park that day. It was fantastic. One of my favorite pictures was taken on the 4th of July. And it's with the golden rule in front of the Statue of Liberty. The coloring looks a little odd, but we just had a thunderstorm, and that's exactly the way the sky looked that day. And I really love this picture. So, of course, we went up to Bath, Maine, and did our actions up there with many, many great stops. Came back to the New York City, the Hudson River, and we went up the Hudson River, the Erie Canal, the Oswego Canal, into the Great Lakes. And one of our supporters did a nice map of where we were in the Great Lakes and where there are nuclear facilities all around the Great Lakes. So this is another example of very communicative art that we used while we were along the way. We finished up our trip in Chicago in mid-September. Then we took the Golden Rule apart and trucked her back to Northern California. I just want to mention a lot of the groups that co-sponsored us along our route, because these are the groups that are also probably doing some work on nuclear disarmament, including Code Pink, Back from the Brink of Nuclear War, World Beyond War, Roots Action, Earthquaker Action Team, which is part of the Quakers that that hosted us in Washington, D.C. for our trip around the Congress, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, of which I'm a member, nuclearban.us, United for Peace and Justice, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Raging Grannies, Quakers, and the Unitarians. So these are people that you might want to take a look at their websites and see what they're doing or suggesting. We just announced that we're sailing to the Pacific Northwest in 2024. Our website will keep you apprised of our schedule as we add events, but we planned our events around a Fleet Week in Seattle, the Victoria Classic and Port Townsend Boat Festivals, and the Vancouver, Washington Peace Fair. So anybody that lives along the coast, the Salish Sea, Puget Sound, where we're going to go, let us know. We'll bring the boat there if we can, and if we can't and you still want to see us, we'll drive to where you are. So we give presentations. Here's just a few pictures of what we do. I see that Ann Wright's on the call. That's her on the right. We see the Golden Rule as a weapon of mass education. So we talk about, for our education, the nuclear weapons tests, the uses of the nuclear weapons, the lasting effect that these uses and tests have had on people and the environment. We talk about the fact that nuclear weapons are already being used in war because we bully other countries and we threaten to use nuclear weapons against them. We talk about the effects of a nuclear war. If a exchange of 100 modern nuclear weapons happened, we would experience nuclear autumn. What would happen is the soot and ash from the explosions would be sucked up into the stratosphere and blow around the planet, and they'd block out enough sunlight to affect crop production. And that effect would probably starve 2 billion people. This is the effect that was used to persuade the United Nations to pass the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We talk about the current dangers of nuclear war, what's happening in Ukraine and Israel and China, North Korea. And Gerry will fill us in more about the current dangers of a possible nuclear war. But it's most important, after people get scared, to talk about the actions that you can take and that other organizations are taking to stop the possibility of a nuclear annihilation. So we've got the tool, the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and other treaties that could potentially be renegotiated and implemented. We have several bills before Congress right now. We have the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Abolition Working Group and the Nuclear Posture Review. Veterans for Peace and the Golden Rule Project separately are members of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which did its work to support the treaty, and were as a result awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And here's where the TPNW was passed by the United Nations, approved by 122 countries, making it illegal to possess, use, deploy, transfer, or threaten to use nuclear weapons. One of our major allies is Back from the Brink, and we're a member of their team too. And they call for nuclear abolition, ending the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear strike, taking our weapons off of hair trigger alert, canceling the nuclear modernization program, which is probably $2 trillion or more, and to renounce the idea of using nuclear weapons first. They have some ideas on their website about how you can take action. And then here's, I've got links to the Nuclear Posture Review, the Nuclear Ban Treaty Collective. If you're doing Martin Luther King Day events, you might want to highlight the fact that Martin Luther King was in opposition to nuclear weapons. Here's a list of the legislation that's in Congress right now. Embrace the Back from the Brink measures and the sole authority of the president to launch a nuclear strike, get rid of some of the military spending and fund human needs, and redirect nuclear weapons spending to clean energy and human needs. That's the Eleanor Holmes Norton bill that she's introduced now 16 times. I can send this presentation to anybody who would like it, or you can go on our website. I'll post it today, vfpgoldenrule.org. So that's what we've been up to. That's what we're going to do. And I'm about to turn the presentation over to Gerry Condon. Here you go, Gerry.
Hello and good morning. Thanks to Helen for a wonderful presentation and for her amazing work. I'm blessed to have such an amazing partner. It took really hundreds and even thousands of activists ultimately to support the recent 13-month-long Golden Rule voyage. But it's very doubtful that it could have happened at all without the leadership and coordination and strong organizing that Helen provided. So we're very, very thankful. Also want to thank Marxist Library again for having us on this morning. I gather that this weekly Sunday program was started by Marxists who didn't have anywhere else to go on Sunday morning when their friends and families were attending Quaker meeting in the Unitarian Church. So good move. I'm a longtime peace activist ever since I refused Army orders to Vietnam in 1968. But I'm relatively new to the issue of nuclear disarmament and nuclear abolition, and I'm just really learning a lot, and still learning. We don't consider ourselves experts by any means, but we're becoming experts of sorts. Many people ask me, well, what did you learn on this epic voyage? And you got to see the peace movement at the local level in many places. So what did you take away from that? And so I've been thinking about that, and I think that one of the things we learned is that history matters, that the bold action inspires people for decades to come, and obviously the actions of the crew of the Golden Rule in 1958 continue to resonate to this day and inspire many people. And there are a lot of people we met along the way that are actually connected to the original crew, either family members or friends, or and connected to either the crew of the Golden Rule or the crew of the sister ship, the Phoenix of Hiroshima, at the time. So this is a real living history, and that's part of the power that the Golden Rule sailboat brings. And she embodies the spirit of bold resistance, and she's held in love and admiration by many people, almost considered sacred. So her arrival in the various ports was always met with tremendous enthusiasm. And I think probably the main thing that I learned from the voyage was that people are hungry for hope and inspiration. They're ready for it, they need it, they want it. And that's what the Golden Rule represented, but certainly many other initiatives coming from peace and anti-war movements have the potential for providing that kind of hope and inspiration and leadership. We ran into many excellent committed peace activists in communities all over the country, often in small dedicated groups, and once again, possibly seeking more national and international direction and coordination. People were happy to help out in any way they could, including attending weekly coordinating committee meetings and taking, and they were eager to take direction that Helen was often providing them. So really impressed by the dedication that people and how people pitched in was really remarkable. It was also interesting to become exposed to the maritime community. The world of boating, it's a whole world unto itself, really, that I didn't even know existed. And the maritime community, although it's generally more conservative and mainstream, was surprisingly supportive, or at least not hostile to our messages of peace and nuclear abolition, especially if they could come admire the beautiful wooden boat and have discussions about the boat itself and sailing. So we made a lot of friends and supporters in that community, the boating community as well. And there's something very special about waging peace in a boat. It inspires people, the sense of adventure, the sense of daring. It conjures up many historic examples, particularly in island nations of the Pacific, where boats and boating and actually using boats as a form of protest and a form of solidarity have a long history. So Helen already mentioned that that when we were in Hawaii, we learned a lot about the impact of U.S. militarism there, the occupation of so much of Hawaiian land, the devastation of the environment, as well as of the Native Hawaiian culture. And there's a lot of ongoing resistance there. You know, we learned to talk about Hawaii and the United States, not Hawaii as part of the United States, because many Hawaiians don't consider Hawaii to be occupied territory, illegally occupied, and there's still a movement for independence there. But certainly throughout the whole Pacific, the similar problems exist with the U.S. military presence even growing right now as they gear up for war against China, doubling down on the naval presence in Guam, for example. And there continues to be a lot of resistance throughout the islands, nations, often led by the indigenous communities on those islands to U.S. militarism. So I think it was really important for us to make a little side trip to Cuba when we saw we were going to be in Key West, only 90 miles away from Havana. It seemed like a no-brainer, especially given the fact that in 1962, the world almost saw a nuclear war, a devastating global nuclear war between the USSR and the US over Cuba. And it kind of gave me the opportunity to revisit that incident. I mean, I remember it from the time. Most of us on this call are old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, I remember I was I think freshman in high school, actually in a Catholic seminary at Santa Barbara, Franciscan Seminary, and I was inspired by the Cuban Missile Crisis to write a patriotic poem, which was published in the school magazine. And it's kind of interesting it was almost a pro-war poem, so it's an embarrassing part of my my personal history, but you know, we all had our transformations. But what really happened, we know that the U.S. discovered that the Soviet Union had placed intermediate nuclear missiles in Cuba aimed at Washington and other points in the United States. And that was considered highly unacceptable. It caused quite a crisis. There was a big showdown. The U.S. established a naval blockade around Cuba and challenged Russian ships that were headed for Cuba. Khrushchev and Kennedy started talking to one another, and I think history shows that they were both kind of very alarmed at how close they were to the potential for a devastating nuclear exchange, and they came to an agreement that stopped that from happening. And the agreement was essentially that the U.S. Well, first of all, the Soviet Union would withdraw its nuclear weapons from Cuba, and then in exchange, the U.S. promised not to invade Cuba, which you might remember they had done with an irregular force of Cuban exiles and CIA, the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was a debacle for the U.S. But there'd been repeated assassination attempts against Fidel Castro, other attempts to undermine and overthrow the Cuban Revolution. So another part of the deal that Khrushchev and Kennedy made was a secret, not public. for political reasons in the U.S., and that was that the U.S. promised to withdraw its nuclear missiles from Turkey, which is actually, probably why Russia had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba in the first place, because the U.S. had placed nuclear missiles in Turkey close to Russia's borders. So that was probably the motivation for the Soviet Union to put missiles in Cuba in the first place. But what was Cuba thinking? I mean, I think that the Cuba felt that they were under such a threat from the U.S. that it made sense for them to have that level of protection from the nuclear missiles. It's a pretty scary thought. But ultimately, one could say, and I think accurately so, that the world came very close to a nuclear war at that time, primarily as a result of the U.S. hostility towards the Cuban Revolution and attempts to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. So all these years later, we still have a U.S. blockade against Cuba, which is doing great harm to the Cuban people. The U.S. hostility remains and is even been increased under Trump, and Biden has maintained Cuba's status as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is totally bogus, but it makes it even more difficult for Cuba to do the necessary banking and trade that's needed so badly, as people are really, really suffering in Cuba right now. And there's a lot of young people leaving the island in desperation. So I think it's really important for the peace movement and the anti-imperialist movement in the U.S. to continue calling for an end to the U.S. blockade, and specifically right now, lower hanging fruit, because Biden could do it all on his own, to take Cuba off the list of state sponsors of terror. U.S. sanctions are, of course, a weapon of war in their own right, and they do great damage, and they kill a lot of people throughout Latin America, including Venezuela and Nicaragua, among others. So anyway, Veterans for Peace has had it was founded in 1985, and its founding principles, which still stand strong, include a commitment to reduce the number of and eventually eliminate all nuclear weapons. However, it's not really been a strong priority programmatically for Veterans for Peace until recent years, with the national project of the Golden Rule, and with the emergence of the Nuclear Abolition Working Group. And Helen mentioned before, the Nuclear Abolition Working Group of Veterans for Peace has been meeting for the last 3 years, almost twice a month on a regular basis. Had many, many wonderful guest speakers. We've done a lot of self-education, and we've supported the voyages of the Golden Rule. But we also produced our own nuclear posture review, which, as Helen mentioned, reviews the U.S. relationship to the other nuclear powers. There's 9 countries that have nuclear weapons: the U.S., the U.K., the USSR, France, and China are the 5 members of the Security Council based on having nuclear weapons, basically. And then there's Pakistan, India, North Korea, Israel. That's 9. Okay, those are the 9 that we know of that have nuclear weapons, and hopefully no more countries will achieve them. But I think the risk of proliferation is certainly ongoing, as long as there's not serious steps taken towards eliminating nuclear weapons altogether. So I wanted to I really highly recommend that people take a look at the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review, which you can find and download from the Veterans for Peace website, veteransforpeace.org. But I want to review certain key sections of it here, which I think you'll all find interesting. And starting with the U.S. nuclear posture considerations vis-a-vis Russia. And I'm reading some of this now. The world has gone from 70,000 nuclear weapons during the height of the Cold War to 14,000 on the planet today. So we do know how to reduce the arsenals by disabling the bombs under strict inspection and verification processes long established. However, the U.S. has missed numerous opportunities to cooperate with Russia over the years, starting at the end of World War II, when President Truman rejected pleas to turn the bomb over to the United Nations under international supervision. That's something I had never heard of before, but I guess it's true. Subsequent U.S. actions that either missed opportunities to risk or actually increase risk of nuclear confrontation with Russia include the following examples. President Reagan rejected President Gorbachev's offer to give up deployment of a Star Wars missile defense system in space as a condition for both countries to eliminate all their nuclear weapons. So that was sure a big missed opportunity. President Clinton refused President Putin's offer to cut our massive nuclear arsenals to 1,500 bombs each, and to call on all of the other nuclear armed states to negotiate the elimination of all nuclear weapons in exchange for the U.S. not placing missile sites in Romania. So another big missed opportunity. President George W. Bush walked out of the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty and put a missile base in Romania. President Trump placed another missile base in Poland. President Bush in 2008 and President Obama in 2014 blocked any discussion of Russian and Chinese proposals for a space weapons ban in the consensus-bound UN Committee for Disarmament in Geneva. President Obama rejected President Putin's offer to negotiate a treaty to ban cyber war. President Bush pulled the U.S. out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And what kind of message does that send to Russia? And from President Clinton, through President Biden, the U.S. has never ratified the 1992 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Well, Russia has ratified it. So, of course, now this was written 2 years ago. So actually published shortly before the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. Of course, we often hear in the media that Russian President Putin has threatened a nuclear war in Ukraine. And I think that's a little bit skewed because, first of all, the President Putin and other Russian leaders have repeatedly stated that they would not use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. For one thing, they saw no practical purpose for doing so. Putin has arguably rattled his nuclear weapons a little bit and reminded people what the nuclear reality is at the current time, because like the U.S., Russia does not have a no first use policy. In fact, I think they maybe did at one point, but their policy is that if they're under serious threat, they feel that their national security has been threatened, especially if they're facing an existential threat, even from overwhelming conventional weapons of NATO, that they would use they have the right to, they retain the right to use nuclear weapons in response to that, which would be a terrible thing. So I think that what Putin has done is basically said, look, this is the the reality that we have now with our nuclear postures. And if NATO keeps on pushing this war, we could end up responding not with nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but a nuclear war between the U.S. and the USS and Russia, or nuclear weapons used in Europe. And of course, it's the U.S. that has nuclear weapons in 5 different European countries, and the Ukraine war was largely a result of the U.S. and NATO pushing military forces, their own military forces, including nuclear weapons, to the very borders of Russia, which does certainly create an existential threat. It's a complex, very complex and terrible war, but that's part of the picture, a very important part of the picture. So the U.S. posture vis-a China is interesting. China keeps its approximately 300 nuclear warheads separated from their missiles, which is a true no-first-use posture. Absent serious provocations, China presents no threat of nuclear attack against the U.S. or its allies. However, the U.S. has encircled China with hundreds of military bases and has signaled a commitment to defend Taiwan's independence, counter to previous agreements with China made during the Nixon administration. The U.S. and its corporate media are generating a constant stream of anti-China propaganda, apparently preparing the U.S. public for a possible war with nuclear-armed China. The current relationship between China and the U.S. is extremely dangerous. Provocative military initiatives and so-called strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan constitute a potentially explosive situation. The nuclear posture vis-a-vis North Korea is also very alarming. Some people feel that the threat of a nuclear exchange with North Korea is greater than the threat with a nuclear exchange with Russia. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, has 40 to 50 nuclear warheads. On the 14th of October 2016, the DPRK was the only nuclear-armed country to vote in favor of a resolution of the First Committee of the UN General Assembly that proposed the UN conference to negotiate a new treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. In other words, they voted in favor of the discussions for the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is interesting. They didn't vote for the TPNW. Later on, none of the nuclear-armed countries did so. In 1994, the US and the DPRK signed an agreed framework. The North Korea would freeze 1 nuclear research reactor and 2 nuclear power plants under construction and rejoin the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT. In return, the U.S. would provide formal assurances to North Korea against the threat or use of nuclear weapons, build 2 nuclear power plants, and provide heavy oil. Both sides promised to, quote, move toward full normalization of political and economic relations. Wow, what a terrific step forward that was, or could have been. However, the U.S. delayed or refused to implement most of the agreement, and I think that was under Clinton's leadership. The deal failed in 2002 when the U.S. stopped oil shipments and listed the DPRK as a rogue regime against whom the U.S. might use nuclear weapons. So in 2018, North Korea and the U.S. had a summit. President Trump and Chairman Kim, who had been threatening each other with the possibility of nuclear war, signed a joint statement. Of course, this is one of Trump's big shows, which unfortunately was not followed through seriously. But at that time, they signed a joint statement which committed to establish new relations between the U.S. and DPRK, build a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and work towards denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The North Korea destroyed its underground nuclear test site, suspended its nuclear and ICBM missile tests and started to dismantle the missile site at Dongchangri, but the U.S. merely reduced its U.S.-South Korea joint war drills, but maintained them. And the U.S. DPRK summit at Hanoi in 2019, the meeting ended when the U.S. rejected North Korea's offer to dismantle its nuclear complex at Yongbyon under the watch of American experts in return for lifting of 5 of 11 UN sanctions. Okay, how are we doing for time here? We're in good shape.
About our hour.
Okay. Finally, I'm going to read the nuclear posture considerations vis-a-vis Iran. Well, actually, and Israel. President Trump withdrew the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, under which Iran promised to forego enrichment of uranium beyond the level where the material could be used for a bomb, in return for lifting U.S. sanctions. Harsh sanctions were then restored on Iran. President Biden has not yet lifted the sanctions, although he says he wants to reinstate the deal, which Iran will not agree to unless sanctions are lifted. Iran voted for the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons and participated fully in all the UN negotiations. Iran has no nuclear weapons. So finally here, Israel. Nuclear-armed Israel's belligerent actions and rhetoric towards Iran have only increased during the Biden administration. Israel, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and the U.S. Recently, this was 2 years ago, recently completed a 5-day joint naval exercise in the Red Sea. The uncertain future of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal is another source of tension, increasing the risk of an Israeli military attack against Iran. In this environment, the U.S. could find itself drawn into a military confrontation with Iran with no control over Israel's possible use of nuclear weapons. That was 2 years ago. Obviously, the threat is even greater now with the incredible, horrible genocidal war that Israel is waging against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and unsettling the whole situation throughout the Middle East. Could all too easily, a wider war in the Middle East could all too easily end up being a nuclear war. So another thing for us to be very concerned about. The Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review goes on to suggest a number of measures could be taken to reduce the risk of nuclear war and eventually to eliminate all nuclear weapons. And I encourage people to check those out. In conclusion, the Nuclear Posture Review of Veterans for Peace says that nuclear disarmament, non-intervention, and climate justice go hand in hand. The world is a much more dangerous place with nuclear weapons, particularly given the current confrontation among nuclear-armed nations. The United States military seeks full-spectrum dominance, and the government appears determined to be the preeminent global power, even in the face of diminishing economic power relative to a rising China. It's hard to imagine the U.S. taking serious steps towards nuclear disarmament without a sea change in the thinking among elites and real posture change in the posture of the rest of the world. Activist efforts to restrain U.S. militarism and intervention around the globe, to cut the military budget, and to encourage mutual respect and diplomacy among nations must go hand in hand with efforts to reduce and eliminate all nuclear weapons. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which went into effect January 22nd, 2021, we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary, is an historic and extremely important event. It expresses the clear desire of the peoples of the world to be free from nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war that could end human civilization. The Nuclear Ban Treaty is a valuable tool for education and organizing. Even though the U.S. and other nuclear-armed states have yet to sign on to the TPNW, many cities in the U.S. have passed resolutions in support of signing. And that as of this point, 2 years ago, New York City was the latest to sign on to the ICANN Cities Appeal, as have several states, I think 5 different states, including California, Oregon, New Jersey, and Maine, have all passed resolutions in support of the TPNW. Veterans for Peace encourages all of our chapters, members, friends, and allies to pursue similar support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in their cities. It's important to build an intersectional movement for peace at home and peace abroad. We are engaged in struggles for racial justice, for non-intervention in the affairs of other nations, and for redirecting funds from the military and nuclear weapons to healthcare, education, and other human rights. We are making common cause with the burgeoning climate justice movement, proclaiming that climate catastrophe and nuclear war are the twin threats to all life on Earth. So that's all I'll read from the conclusion there. And finally, I would suggest that obviously it's important for us, all of us, to be educated ourselves and others about the growing danger of nuclear war as a part and part of our anti-war and anti-imperialist activism. It seems to me, however, that over the last several decades, the issues raised by nuclear weapons have been mainly the concern of the arms control organizations who seek to reduce the risks of nuclear war without abandoning the underlying politics of American specialism and the policy of nuclear deterrence. And then also the other group that's been largely involved with opposing nuclear weapons, pacifists and pacifist organizations who oppose all war and violence, but are not always guided by a critique of U.S. imperialism as the driving force of violence in the world today. So this is certainly changing, as many U.S. pacifists are also well-informed anti-imperialists as well. But I do scratch my head a little bit. Why is it that anti-war, anti-imperialist, and socialist groups generally have relatively little to say about nuclear weapons? Is that merely a reflection of the pattern of fragmentation, segmentation in the peace movement? We're in our different silos. And the peace movement itself is in its own silo, but it seems like the anti-nuclear movement, the movement to abolish nuclear weapons, is even in a smaller silo within the peace movement. I wonder if
Gerry, you might want to bring it to an end.
Yes, thank you. So, okay, well, I can bring it to an end right there. I'm just kind of challenging. I guess I would challenge all of us to do a little homework and ponder whether and how we can do a better job of integrating the concerns about nuclear weapons into our anti-war and anti-imperialist efforts. And so I think that's an important question for all of us. I think we need a bigger, broader, sharper anti-war movement and, of course, anti-nuclear movement. And I challenge us all to pursue avenues for doing so. And so thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the Veterans for Peace work for nuclear abolition and, of course, the amazing voyage of the Golden Rule. And I want to thank Roger Harris and Eugene Ruel and the Marxist Library for this wonderful opportunity. And I look forward to the questions and comments.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Gerry and Helen, for your comments. And I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions. Before we turn to questions, I just want to remark that the United States didn't limit its testing to the Marshall Islands, but also tested right here in the United States, in Nevada and New Mexico. And there's a whole sordid story about that we could probably spend a whole session on. So I just wanted to make that comment, but thank you so much. There's so many questions that people have. I will keep a stack here. Let me just, before we go on, let me just remark about our future programs here. Because coming up next week, January 14th, we have Emmanuel Ness speaking on a critique of Western Marxism. And as Western Marxism, as you know, kind of downplays the significance of what sometimes called actually existing socialism, especially in this global South. So that should be a very interesting talk. And then on January 21st, we have our friend and comrade Jack Rasmus from St. Mary's College speaking on spin versus reality, the US economy and the working class in 2024. And on January 28th, Gabriel Rockhill will speak on liberalism and fascism. Again, something we need to be very aware of, I think. So those are some of the comments, upcoming questions. So we'll turn to Q&A. Remind you to keep your questions and comments short, and hopefully, and the responses as well. We'll go from, after each question or comment, we'll ask you to respond, Helen and Gerry, briefly, so we can get as many people in as possible, because we do end at 2:30. No, 12:30. So
12:30.
yeah, 12:30. Thank you. So okay, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will try to keep a stack. Try to keep your questions brief, and I'll remind you that we don't tolerate racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic language at the library. So I see, let me get my glasses on. Okay, I see Richard, Janet, and Yusuf as on the stack. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. I just wanted to start off by, if next time you make a trip from Texas to Cuba, I'd offer my services as a all but certified bareboat sailing, as well as 4 years in the Navy, U.S. Navy. A couple of questions came up, or a couple of things came up. One of which was you asked at the Gerry, you asked at the end of your thing about why it was that the siloization of various anti-war and peace and that kind of stuff. And I agree, there is a lot of siloization out there. And at the risk of offending some people here, I'll suggest that perhaps part of the problem lies in so much of the peace movement stemming from the quote, the witnessing of the witnessing activities. And I say that even having taken part in that for 50 years, roughly. I know a lot of people are not, I don't know how to go out and table, how to approach people, to organize and to grow the movement. That's one point. And I'll allow you to debate that. The other question is, or that thing that crossed my mind is that you are out there, talking about nuclear war, and not to diminish its importance, but as things have been demonstrating lately in Ukraine in particular, the emphasis is now on drone warfare, and more importantly on hypersonic weapons, which I regard a good hypersonic, non-nuclear hypersonic weapon placed anywhere can very, very, very effectively impact the infrastructure of the country. And I can't help but think that you're sort of chasing the, what was it? Dick Cheney, I think, said that an army goes to war prepared for its last war. And I can't help but think that pursuing this whole nuclear posture is sort of chasing history, if you will. And at that, I'll shut up and allow you to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Gerry, do you want to respond, or Helen? Either you want to respond?
Yeah, well,
individually. Go ahead.
we all need to, responding to Richard. First of all, thanks for offering your services. We'll be in touch. We're always looking for captains, for the qualified captains for the Golden Rule, and we do have a summertime voyage planned from mid-June through the end of September throughout the Pacific Northwest. You're certainly right that we all need to learn new organizing skills and how to get out and reach the public more effectively and become better organizers. That's certainly true. As far as your last point goes, though, I'd say, sure, there's other weapons systems we need to be aware of. There's many so-called conventional weapons that are arguably about as destructive as nuclear weapons might be, depending on the circumstances. So I'm not saying that we should only focus on nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons continue to be an incredible threat. I think having survived the Cold War without having had a nuclear war since Hiroshima and Nagasaki has maybe created a sense of complacency and somehow faith in these leaders that are leading us into all these other wars, somehow that they're going to continue to be responsible and restrain their militaries from using nuclear weapons. No, I think that if anything, I would say that the danger of nuclear war is greater now than it ever has been, and it'll be a bit of a miracle and a whole lot of organizing to keep us from actually experiencing a nuclear war.
I also think that these new weapons may be a reason for us to say, yeah, nuclear weapons are obsolete. Let's just get rid of them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Either nuclear weapons are obsolete or humans are, one or the other.
Daniel Ellsberg said the U.S. uses nuclear weapons every day. They're like a gun pointing a loaded gun at somebody's head, and so they're definitely in play.
Yeah, another person well worth listening to. Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, the two of you, for the work, this project. Pretty amazing. And by the way, I don't think the U.S. has hypersonic missiles yet, but maybe if the U.S. does, then what Richard was suggesting might happen. Anyway, I'm wondering if you've been in contact with Scott Ritter. He's been working on a nuclear disarmament movement, and he has a project called Waging Peace. It's a film and campaign for nuclear disarmament. I have contact information for him if you don't have it. So that's one thing.
Okay.
Another, do you focus only on nuclear disarmament? I'm wondering because I've been involved with boat projects around Gaza for many years. And Anne Wright, who I believe is still on this call, also has been involved in those. And it's you remember the 2010 Gaza Freedom Flotilla. I was a passenger on that, so was she. And it was a nonviolent direct action to break Israel's illegal siege of Gaza by sea. So and there have been ongoing boat, we call them boat projects for, ever since then. Have you considered working together, maybe with Anne, on this? And regardless, would you consider flying a Palestinian flag on your mask when you do, as you travel? So
in respecting the history of the Golden Rule Project and the fact that we still need people to be working on nuclear issues, the Golden Rule Sailboat itself will be devoted to nuclear issues. But as far as flying a Palestinian flag, that's a possibility. I'll write that down as a suggestion and put it with our people to see if that makes sense for our 2024 voyage. And thank you for mentioning that. We're friends with Anne, and if I had a chance to take a boat to Gaza, I might do that. But yeah, I'm not thinking about the Golden Rule itself going to Gaza or anything.
Yeah, well, Veterans for Peace is dedicated to restraining our government from intervening in the internal affairs of other countries, whether overtly or covertly, and certainly we are devoted to building an intersectional anti-war movement, and so it's not a hard leap for us at all to express our solidarity with the Palestinian people. I think we flying a Palestinian flag this summer when we're sailing around the Pacific Northwest is something we would probably seriously consider. And then Janet, I just want to thank you. I get your digest of many links to and I guess we didn't respond about Scott Ritter, and we have been in touch with Scott, and we'll probably, in fact, there was a possibility for a while that he was going to be one of our speakers when we were in New England, and it didn't work out. But that's a good suggestion that we take another look at some of his recent book and other efforts regarding nuclear weapons and nuclear war, and maybe make common cause with Scott. Thank you for the suggestion.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just comment that if you check the Vets for Peace website, there is a statement on Gaza and the whole situation there. So urge people to keep up with that. Moving on, we have Yusuf and followed by Millie. So go ahead, Yusuf.
Thank you very much for a very good presentation. I was among those who helped set up the visit of Golden Rule in New Haven. We just, you triggered a memory. I was in Ankara, I'm Turkish, during the Cuban missile crisis, and it was obvious. The Cuba-Turkey connection was obvious to us. I remember my father, I was in my father's office. He said, well, the ships, the Soviet ships are going to Cuba, and, if there's a confrontation, Ankara could be a target, was an obvious target for a Soviet strike. Luckily, as I said, cooler head prevailed. Also, I'd like to mention that the many soldiers who were used, actually on both sides, as human guinea pigs during for nuclear tests. We have a survivor here in Connecticut. And finally, I'd like to mark the passing of Al Marder, a few weeks ago. He was a great a peace activist, headed the U.S. Peace Council and also the Amistad Committee, another peace ship in New Haven. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. We had a great stop in New Haven and in Connecticut in general, several really great cities and events. And fortunately, we were honored to have a visit with Al Martin. He wasn't able to come out to see the boat, so we took a scale model of the Golden Rule to his home and had a really lovely visit with him. He was a veteran, a member of Veterans for Peace, and he was always encouraging Veterans for Peace to tell us how important the veterans' voice is and how much more we should be stepping up to the plate. So I'm always feeling prodded by Al to do even more, and it's a nice prodding. So I appreciate Al Marder a lot. Al Marder Presente.
Okay, thank you. And next is Millie. And
Hi.
anybody
you.
else? Go ahead, Millie.
First of all, thanks to Helen and Gerry. Great to see you again. And Al Marder continues to push us to. We saw him 4 days before he died and said, "Why aren't you doing more now? What are you doing with this?"
Right, exactly.
And to back up on what Yusuf said too, and somebody referred to earlier, if you look for Hank Bolden, Bolden, atomic veteran, he's the Connecticut veteran who was part of the tests in Nevada. And he played when the Golden Rule, he spoke when the Golden Rule was in New Haven. That's how we got to meet him. So thank you for connecting us. And Gerry, I originally put my hand up because I had heard via the grapevine that you were recently trying to get to Gaza, but didn't get there. Is that a rumor or is that true?
No, I actually was honored to represent Veterans for Peace on the first international delegation to attempt to get to the Rafah border and to push for humanitarian aid to be allowed to cross into Gaza. And we actually weren't, we made it as far as Cairo, but ultimately the Egyptian authorities wouldn't allow us to proceed to the heavily militarized Rafah border. But we were able to make contacts with Egyptian and other international activists who were organizing caravans of humanitarian aid. We met with the Red Crescent in Cairo and made a substantial donation to them and helped pack boxes of humanitarian aid. And of course, there's still, Israel's genocidal policy towards Gaza is, aside from bombing the hell out of the civilian population, is starving, consciously denying them food, water, medicine, and all life-giving facilities. So that's a continuing issue. They're not getting nearly the aid that they need to survive, even, and that's a growing crisis that should be at the front of all of our activism right now.
So that raises a question for me. Like, we've been trying to get through to Biden, Blinken, et cetera, nothing. I'm wondering if anybody on this call knows Jill Biden, Kamala Harris, or if Anthony Blinken. We need some women compassion to get to these men. This is lunacy, and I don't know how we get to them. So that's a question. Thank you all for everything.
Okay, well, thank you. And we have two more speakers. We have Roger and Raj. So go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Gene, and thank you, Helen and Gerry. Incredible story, incredible politics. I really appreciate that. It's kind of, I also appreciated Joseph mentioning Al Marder, who, yeah, he is a pride and a inspiration for us all. Just mention a little bit more about the importance of the anti-nuclear mission. Gerry and Helen mentioned it, and I think just underlined some of those things that are really important, is that the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty has two sides to that coin. One side is not to have more countries becoming nuclear powers, but the other side is that in return for it not proliferating, the existing nuclear powers are supposed to move to the direction of disarmament. And that sometimes gets lost. The importance that sometimes the focus is on not getting more countries nuclear armed, but the flip side is that other countries who are nuclear armed need to disarm, and that's a very important thing. And Gerry mentioned why that was. He said that every day the United States uses nuclear weapons as a threat. And the fact that the United States uses nuclear weapons as a threat is an incentive for other countries to protect themselves by getting nuclear weapons. So the struggle really is, once again, at our doorstep to end the U.S. use of the threat of nuclear weapons and for the U.S. to disarm. But Helen and Gerry, I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the journey of the Golden Rule. I mean, that was 15 months of your life chasing a sailboat around the United States. What was that like, and what was the day-to-day work? How did you organize it? All that kind of stuff.
Gerry, Helen, are you there? Maybe
Gerry, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we had a little problem for a minute. We got kicked off the Zoom for a minute. They were good back. First of all, affirm what you just said, Roger. I think it's
Excuse me, Gerry.
if there's going to be nuclear disarmament or nuclear abolition. Hello?
Your audio
Can you
is
hear me?
getting a little bit weak. It might be a good idea to turn off the video for just a second.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm going to turn my video off. And hopefully this will help.
I can hear you now, fine.
It looks like we're frozen now. Okay, good. Yeah, I just wanted to affirm what you said, Roger. I think if we're going to abolish nuclear weapons in this world, the U.S. is going to have to take the lead. So it's our responsibility to push, because the other countries are unlikely to take any steps backwards on, and as long as the U.S. continues to have an aggressive foreign policy backed up by nuclear weapons. So I'll leave it to Helen to talk about a little bit of day-to-day stuff on the Golden Rule or what that was like.
Well, of course, there were months leading up to even launching, but you know, really the 1,000 people approximately that we worked with along the route carried the burden of the organizing, because there's no way that Gerry and I could organize, you know, 400 events. So it's really the other people that did that much work, but day to day it was difficult, you know, trying to make sure we had enough crew and that our schedule and the weather kind of matched up. Most of the time we were very, very lucky and that happened. But you know, it was get up at dawn and crash before we were finished with our work, just because it was long days every day. You know, and you know, this is not an easy project to run, as far as when you're in a sailing season and having an unending sailing season for over a year on this trip, as well as when we were in Hawaii. It does take its toll, and I'm really happy to be back in the saddle, planning for 2024, doing our best to start the follow-up work that needs to be done from the Great Loop. People took great care of us, though. We had places to stay, food to eat, good events. Our volunteers and crew are the core of what's going on here. And it couldn't happen without all the people that pitched in to make it work.
Yeah, which is one of the things that's so special about it. It's a huge collective effort that it does involve hundreds of people to make it successful. So it's all the more gratifying.
Thank you. But let me just interject here that you mentioned Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the United States has been using nuclear weapons to threaten other countries. And Daniel Ellsberg has a wonderful essay on that, within a few months after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States began using nuclear weapons to threaten its former allies, the Soviet Union. And he has a list of like 32 examples where the United States uses nuclear weapons to threaten its friends and allies. And I think Kissinger said somewhere, it's dangerous to be an enemy of the United States, but even more dangerous to be a friend, something to that effect. But I apologize for that. Let me move on to who's next. Raj, go ahead, Raj.
Yeah, hi, Helen and Gerry. Thank you for this very informative and inspiring presentation, and really inspiring lives of such dedication that we got to see today. I wanted to just add that the United States is really, as you have pointed and others have pointed out, really is the source of the danger of nuclear war. It's really not other countries. Soviet Union never took the lead to escalate the arms race. A lot of countries, country I come from is India, and they now have a different regime there, or different party ruling, right of center, very militaristic, in my opinion. But before, from around 1950 to at least 1970s, was a period of 25 years, India had a very principled position. And they said, we promise not to develop nuclear weapons in exchange for you freezing development of nuclear weapons and promising to all the 5 nuclear countries to give you 25 years to start disarming nuclear weapons. If you commit to that, we will not develop. Nothing happened. Of course, it's the United States, not Soviet Union. And of course, the other countries like France and England are associated with the United States. They basically are. So they follow that. So the situation really is, the challenge is right here. And world opinion, basically, and the 2 parties both agree to be equally aggressive, or they take turn. Rhetoric goes up and down, but they both represent imperialism, which is the inner drive of profits, which doesn't care about the lives of the people. So I think this is the problem we face, it seems to me, and I would like your reaction to it. But one other thing that, from your inspiring example, an idea comes to me, and I hope somebody or collection of people will take it up, think about it, is the election season is going to be upon us very soon. And we are going to get these 2 terrible candidates. Either doesn't matter who they are, and they will be driven by the same forces. It doesn't matter the face changes. So like a boat, it's a land equivalent would be a bus. you know, a bus for nuclear disarmament that follows these two camps everywhere they go, to follow them, and wherever they have crowds, bring the bus and say, look, we want these politicians to promise to freeze nuclear weapons and disarm. Look what can happen to your lives. And this is my idea. And I'd like you to comment on that. You're already doing a lot, so it has to be somebody else's, other people's initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen.
Veterans for Peace members, some chapters have buses. And so it's possible that we could, even as Veterans for Peace, organize buses for that purpose. And yes, it will take somebody else to do some of that, but I think it's a brilliant idea.
Okay. Moving forward to Janet. Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to add a couple of things. So Sunday, next Sunday, January 14th, is going to be another day, another big day of national protests against the Gaza genocide. There's going to be a march and rally in San Francisco at starting at 1 o'clock at Civic Center. It may affect participation in next Sunday's ICSS event. And I'm wondering whether wherever the golden rule is on that, next Sunday, or maybe you could plan something. Maybe you could have a presence if you're somewhere along the West Coast. Maybe near San Francisco, fly the Palestinian flag, or many of them. I know that someone in the North Bay and San Rafael area, Jane Jewell, I don't know if you know her. She has been supportive of the Gaza boat projects over the years, and has done some boat actions. She has a boat, and maybe you can work with her to, I could connect the two of you up, or the three of you up, if you'd like that. So you can.
Thank you, Janet. You have a lot of good ideas for us. The golden rule currently is in her home port in Eureka, Humboldt Bay, in far northern California, where she's receiving some maintenance and repair work, and she'll be there until we'll be sailing north to the Pacific Northwest. But thanks for mentioning the Boats to Gaza project again. That's a really profound effort, international effort. And I don't know if Ann Wright's still on the call here. She's a very busy woman, as you know. But if she is, I invite her to say a few words about ongoing organizing for Boats to Gaza and women's Boats to Gaza. Ann, are you here? And
Gerry, it looks like she's not with us
may have
now.
gone. I wanted to acknowledge a couple other people. I see Norm Peterson is on the call. He was one of our captains in the Pacific Northwest in 2016, and we look forward to seeing him again this year. Anthony Donovan is giving Helen and I high praise here in the chat, and I just want to return the favor. Anthony was an amazing organizer for us in New York City, and arranged the meetings with the UN, arranged for the Cuban diplomats to come down and visit the boat, and is a powerhouse of organizing. Anthony, if you want to step up and say a few words about upcoming activities in Washington, D.C., I welcome you to do so.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I just want to thank you both, Helen and Gerry. I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, I had to put something in, because when that a wonderful question about what did it take for 15 months, and all I know is about 9 days of that 15 months, really. And I never seen two people work so hard, so dedicated, get so little sleep, and a great back and forth team that would relieve each other, and one would go here, one would go there. But what an amazing journey. And this golden rule has inspired us. It's connected me and so many of us to all the many thousands in 1958 who in this country and around the world gathered to stop this horror. And remember, as we talk about Gaza and yes, of course, it's really the same industry, folks. So I put in the chat something that is happening in DC on January 31st to February 2nd. It's where all the corporations that make our nuclear weapons and the many hundreds of companies that make nose cones or make this part of the technology, they all come together and have a great time in Washington, D.C., flowing in money. And all our agencies that organize this, our NNSA, it will all be there. So I put that in the chat for you to check out, but it's down there. And last year there was about 4 or 5 of us with little signs outside, and we tried to go in and leaflet and flyer until we got kicked out. But anyway, it'd be great if anyone feels so motivated to come down. These, by the way, are the same people that make the weaponry that we are sending to Israel. So if you're concerned about bombs going off in Israel, I know everyone on this call is, and God bless the Gazans. But so the industries that make these weapons, that make our nuclear weapons, and also have everything to do with the bombs, they're all going to be gathering in DC. So come on down if you have a moment. Take a bus down for a day or up for a day. But yeah, just thank you. This boat has inspired, like I said, connected us to the past and brought it into the present. And this 15 months of setting seeds, it's been so inspiring for so many people. I can't thank you two enough for hanging in there and just putting up with day in and day out. And it was an honor and a pleasure to run around trying to organize events for you. It was the least we could do, and we fell short a couple of times, but you know, it was great. So thank you. I don't know if there's anything else, but God bless you. Yeah. And if anyone can come down to DC on the 31st, wonderful. I know everyone's very busy. But there are many other events. George McGovern, who Helen went into George's office back in April and was part of the pressure to get him to come to the TPNW gathering in last month in New York. And he did. He came up. He was the only representative that came up. And it really inspired him. So the Golden Rule works in many ways, but that little seed really inspired him to want to do more. And he is trying to get as many congressmen as he can on our House floor to make 1-minute statements supporting the TPNW and nuclear abolition. So we have a possible date of January 18th, but they're working on that. So there are many things going on. We'll keep each other posted. God bless. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anthony. You're typically humble, but in my opinion, one of the foremost longtime dedicated anti-nuclear activists in the United States, and you're still going strong. Thank you so much for all you do.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to comment, you remarking on that. I recall reading somewhere that, you know, the nuclear and merchants of death generally are very careful that when they put out their contracts, they try to have contracts in every congressional district so that they have advocates there to push these ideas, saying, oh yeah, we have jobs in that area, so we want more jobs there. I think Bernie has commented on that. Bernie Sanders has commented on that, but the ways in which the system is structured to support the warmongers is distressing.
Right.
And I don't know
Which is one,
with that, but
which is one of the reasons we have to push for peaceful, sustainable jobs as well, because
absolutely. But as somebody said,
so,
you know, America has the best politicians money can buy. So let's keep that in mind. Roger, do you have something to say, or were you going to?
so Anne has had her hand up for a while.
Is that Anne on?
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi.
good. Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this question of the peace movement, and I know all of us have, and kind of following up a little bit on what Richard was saying. One of the things that I think we haven't sufficiently explored is organizing at the base in this stuff, particularly, and there is some hope. I mean, my labor union did pass a ceasefire resolution. And I very much wonder whether people are really looking into the possibility of talking with workers, organizing workers within these plants around these issues, or whether we just assume that everybody's completely bought off without really understanding the situations of workers in our country. So I just wanted to lay that out. I think what Canadian workers have been doing around arms manufacturing that's being exported to Israel is very interesting. And I think it is a moment for hope, and including within soldiers that are currently serving in the US military.
Okay, we're moving towards our conclusion here. About 5 more minutes left. I see Richard has his hand up, so go ahead, Richard. And then we have another speaker, Regina, I believe. And then we will probably draw to an end there.
I guess I want to sort of go along what Anne was saying, you know, and that is what efforts are they making to reach out? Let me back into this for a little bit. I'm a member of CCDS of the Move the Money subcommittee. My question, I guess, and sort of follows up with what Anne was saying, is what efforts do you make to reach out to other efforts along those lines? If you know, so I'll just hang up because we're getting toward the end. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I see Regina's hand is up. Yes,
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Regina from San Francisco. I'm also a great supporter of the Golden Rule Project and a member of WEALTH. I'm also a member of a Friends Committee on National Legislation advocacy team, one of the, I don't know, 150 advocacy teams. The issue we're going to be lobbying on in 2024 is the unfunded mandates. Every branch of the service gets to put a wish list together and for things that aren't in the military budget. So the bill number is HR 4740. It's a bipartisan bill. Senator Warren will be reintroducing a Senate companion bill. So we'll be lobbying on this, our members of Congress and senators this year. And it's if we could get rid of the unfunded mandates, that would, and say in our campaign that we want those to be spent for social good purposes, that would be a good way to you know, get the military budget to be much smaller than it is. There are many other bills that I know that the Golden Rule had listed on its goals for the voyage that also address Pentagon spending. But I encourage people to join FCNL advocacy teams in your district. We need more people. And And even if you can't become a regular member of a team, you certainly can be an ally and a supporter by attending lobbying visits, particularly when we have statewide visits in California, for example, with our 2 senators. So if you go up on FCNL's website, you'll learn about this campaign, and look up that bill number and look for Senator Warren's bill. I also put in the chat the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Still a possibility that we could get a vote on that in 2024, hopefully before July, before the Golden Rule sails, but be on the lookout for that too. It's certainly directly related, and it would be great if it doesn't pass, then compensation ends in July for all victims. But we need an expanded bill to cover the Marshallese, cover nuclear plant operators, et cetera, workers, et cetera. So those are two things I wanted to add to the mix. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And this brings to mind, I believe Mark said something to the effect that it's not enough to talk about the world. We need to change it. And I think we're all agreed on that point. And thank you so much to both our speakers, Helen and Gerry. You did a great job. We had a wonderful discussion. We have about 2 minutes left. I just want to say, on behalf of the committee, planning committee is about 8 members on the planning committee, and we meet every Monday to put together our programs. And we really do welcome suggestions about who to have on and what topics to cover and how to go about doing all this. It's wonderful to have such input that we get. We really appreciate that. And any final comments, Gerry or Helen, for one?
I would thank everybody for being here. This is a great discussion, inspiring. I would just say that, the Golden Rule Project has been remarkably successful, but, we're not the end all and the be all. We do think that, however, that the Golden Rule Project and Veterans for Peace have effectively opened up a new front and a new aspect in the anti-war, anti-nuclear movement. One of our main purposes is to lift up the work that local groups are already doing, to lift up all the efforts that are going on nationally and internationally. So we're kind of we see ourselves as a super networker. And we encourage people to be in touch with us. We just put out a new update, Golden Rule update, and email newsletter last night, and we'd love to send it to all of you. And you can reach us, put it in the chat at vfpgoldenruleproject@gmail.com, and we'll add you to our mailing list and send you that newsletter. Thank you again. And Helen, do you have a couple of words to say?
Well, I'm just pleased with the discussion, and know that these ideas that are coming forward will possibly go out in our next newsletter and on our website regarding how we can encourage local people to get together to move the money, reach out to others, reach out to labor, and just expand these great ideas to be even more effective. Thank you.
And Janet, we will fly that Palestinian flag.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Helen and Gerry. And I thank everybody for participating. This has been a wonderful program, I think, and it will be posted on our website, ICSSmarks.org, in the very near future. And I think Raj is going to cut us off pretty soon.
I need your permission to stop the recording.
Shut that sucker down.
Thank you. All right.